What is going on, everybody? It is the one and only Q here from Retro Q Gaming, and well, we are just weeks away from next generation consoles, which are basically last generation hardware at this point. But anyway, we are weeks away from next generation consoles. The Xbox Series S, the Xbox Series L, and the PlayStation 5 are all just several weeks away. I am completely whelmed. As everyone knows, I recently cancelled my year-long pre-orders on both consoles because they're completely worthless for me for the moment. And, well, that's basically that anyway. But we are getting ever so slightly closer, and as more and more information is coming out about these new consoles and what they can, or more appropriately, what they can't do, well, we all know that the wheels have not only fallen off, but at this point, the windows, the doors, everything inside, the seats are removed. Basically, it's an absolute disaster. These consoles are apparently going to be an absolute joke. Now, what are we talking about here anyway? Well, we all know that, let's use the PlayStation 5 as our quick first example. We all know the PlayStation 5 is less powerful than the Xbox Series L. And because of this, we are getting poor game choices and poor game design choices and poor game design philosophy that is leading to dynamic 4K. That is leading to 30 frames per second. That is leading to lower quality, lower resolution performance modes in order to try and hit, but not maintain, 60 FPS. Looking at you, Demon Souls, it doesn't keep 60 from what we've seen so far. And then you've got the likes of Spider-Man, which runs at, well, at least Spider-Man Remastered anyway. That's right, a remastered 2-year-old game from PlayStation 4, which in theory should be easier to brute force up because of the additional power above what it was designed for. Dynamic 4K 30 FPS with HDR and ray tracing, or dynamic 4K 60 FPS target without all the bells and whistles. That's an absolute disaster if you ask me. There's nothing next gen about that at all. But let's move on to the biggest offender, because as bad as the PlayStation 5 sounds, we have an even bigger offender. And this one is Xbox. Now, it's not specifically the Xbox Series S, it's not specifically the Xbox Series L, it's a little bit of both and the whole thing in general. Because both of these consoles, the fact that there is even two different spec consoles at all, is absolutely well and truly laughable, if you ask me. Now, let's go on to the main thing we want to talk about, and just how next-gen are these two piece of shit next-gen consoles. Well, they're not really next-gen at all, when you think about it. At least what we've been seeing so far. Because, well, it's looking pretty rough so far. Now, Microsoft have been kind of non-understandably cagey about showing off next-gen games when it comes to this. And the first thing we officially did see from Microsoft about an actual next-gen game, not talking about backwards compatibility or anything like that, but that will come into play a little bit later. But either way, next-gen, what we see as the very first piece of software running on an actual Xbox Series L, because remember, Halo is running on a PC, therefore will be even better than the Series L version. Well, we get Dirt 5, and yes, it looks like absolute Dirt 5, because there are several different modes in this game, one of which is the resolution mode, which goes for native 4K, but can give you a bit of frame rate issues, because even though it targets 60 FPS, multiple different outlets have said that it frequently hovers anywhere between 30 and 60, and it kind of averages out to around 40. Now, I know someone's going to say, oh, but look at the cherry-picked software used in the Digital Foundry video. Yeah, there's multiple other videos out there that show it playing much, much worse in that mode. And then, of course, there's the other two versions in this as well. There's the frame rate version. That's right, the world's most powerful console needs a frame rate performance mode in order to hit 60 FPS in a racing game. Now, bear in mind, if you didn't notice already, racing games are the second easiest and second performance light games genre even that you need to do in order to run them on your hardware. Fighting games are number one the easiest, but racing games are the next easiest. Especially ones that aren't big open world like Dirt. Something that's just confined to a track like Forza Motorsport is why you see much higher performance than the likes of, well, at least on consoles anyway, Forza Horizon, which is open world. But anyway, it has to run at a dynamic resolution, a dynamic 4K, and lower quality assets in order to try maintain 60 FPS better. But not only that, it gets worse. There is a 120 FPS mode as well, which is typically what you would think, at least all well and good, but then you remember how underpowered and shite these consoles actually are. And you run on your 120 FPS mode, and these look absolutely atrocious. They're downgraded to such a degree that the Xbox Series L version of Dirt 5 running at 120 FPS looks like an early Xbox One game. Whereas that same 120 FPS mode on the Xbox Series S looks like a PS3 game. Let's be real, I'm not going to say a PS2 game because, well, Switch games look like PS2 games. But the disappointment doesn't stop there. Now, we're not going to go through everything. We're just going to use maybe 4 examples. But the disappointment doesn't stop there because we are going to go with the next thing that Microsoft showed off. That's right, Microsoft's official second thing to lead with for their next generation running on Xbox Series L hardware is Yakuza 7, Like a Dragon. And once again, even though it's an existing current generational game that should be able to be cranked up based on all the stuff we've heard from all of these companies, well, it's still an absolute shit show. Because remember, Yakuza, Like a Dragon, is a turn-based RPG. It's not like Yakuza 0, it's not like Yakuza Kiwami, Kiwami 2, it's not like Yakuza 3, 4, 5, or even 6. It is a turn-based RPG. And Yakuza 7 Like a Dragon has 3 different modes on next generation consoles, just like Dirt does. But let's get the early disappointment out of the way, shall we? The Xbox Series S, what is supposedly a next generation console, will be running Yakuza 7 in its standard visual mode at 1440p 30 FPS. Or it will be running at 900p 60 FPS. Now you may be wondering, 900p, why does that sound kind of weird and familiar? Well, that's the resolution that hasn't been used on PCs since the early 2000s, or if you buy some like weird small 14 or 13 inch laptop or something like that, you might still get a 900p screen. But there's 2 other places you may have heard of it as well. One, it's a resolution that the Switch usually targets, simply because 1080p for the piece of shit Switch hardware, it just can't do it a lot of the time. So it aims for lower resolution because it's shitty hardware. But specifically in relation to the Xbox, you might remember it from about 7 years ago, when, because the Xbox One was a piece of shit compared to the PlayStation 4, the hardware was unable to push 1080p in games that on the PlayStation could run at 1080p. So you had the Xbox running at 900p, or 700p, or 892p, because there's, fuck resolution, am I right? But either way, your next generation console is playing a current generation game at 900p 60 FPS. What an absolute fucking joke. But I know what everyone wants to hear. How does the world's most powerful console, the 12 teraflop monster, the 12 teraflop beast, the native 4K 120 FPS ray tracing, no compromise machine, how does that run the last generation game that is Yakuza 7 Like a Dragon? Well, like we mentioned, there are 3 different performance profiles for you to use on this game. Only 2 of which have been outlined for the Xbox Series S, but we do have them in full detail for the Xbox Series L. So if you run it in quality mode, you do get a native 4K with a laughably bad 30 FPS. Or if you even turn on performance mode, you get 1440p 60 FPS. Yikes, what a fucking joke. But hey, that's all these fucking consoles are at this point. Now, while we don't have 100% specifics on the final mode, it is called normal mode, and it runs at what's reportedly mostly 60 FPS with a dynamic resolution and slightly lower quality settings. Overall, what an absolute shit show from everything we've been shown so far. And just as the extra little cherry on top, the pièce de résistance, if you will, Microsoft have spent so much time big up in their backwards compatibility, their auto HDR, all their upgrades, their resolution, their dynamic resolution, their frame rate increases, all of this stuff. They've been bigging up everything about the console and the backwards compatibility. They have said multiple times, they have bandied around 4K, 60 FPS, 120 FPS, world's most powerful console, 12 teraflops. They talk about all this power and they don't show you shit. They've done the same thing with Gears of War 5 when talking about a backwards compatibility upgrade from the Xbox One version running on the Xbox Series L. They've talked all about this other stuff. They've talked 4K, 120 FPS, all these extra upgrades that are coming, like 50% more particles than the PC's Ultra settings, which is still lower than the PC's Nightmare setting. All this other crap and all as well, but they don't show it off. But you know who did show it off? Some people that got their hands on an early Xbox Series L. And you know what happened? They captured and compared the upgraded version of Gears 5 to the Xbox One X version. And you know what? Other than a difference in one extra little rubbish bin and what is potentially a different native resolution, there's absolutely no difference. What an absolute fucking joke.